Hi, this is Laura, and welcome to Week 4. This week we will be studying aspects of product design and experience. Our topics are Norman's 3 levels of emotional design, conceptual and mental models, tasks, objects, and terminology, affordances, and prototypes, where we will continue to work and iterate on the ones you've already started, and an overview of our Week 4 activities, which will include you developing a conceptual model of your prototype and including something called affordances, which we will be talking about, and you will do a prototype peer review and a whole class emotional design reflection. So just to always reorient us to our design thinking process, in prior weeks we have been learning to empathize, define, ideate, and then last week you did your first attempt at a prototype, and this week you will continue to refine your prototype and move into testing. So from this point forward in the course, we're pretty much going to be moving between prototype and test in our design thinking process. As noted, Norman's 3 corresponding levels of emotional design are items we will be learning about this week. And so when you're thinking about your learning design or a product design, there are 3 levels of this emotional design that you might experience. One, and these do go kind of in order. Your first impression tends to be your most visceral impression of the design, which is what is your immediate impression. Then it moves into your what's called a behavioral design, which is essentially what your experience is when you use a design. This is often interchangeably used with usability. And then the last is a reflective design. How do we interpret a design and what does it mean to us? And so you'll see here that many of these concepts go into the design, the product, in this case a learning experience, and then how the user interacts or experiences that design in an emotional manner. The other thing that we'll be learning about this week is conceptual versus mental models. And so this is important as you consider your prototypes, because you are coming up with a conceptual model of what you believe your prototype to be at this point. And you're going to continue to make iterations of that. And then when you go into the testing mode, then that's when you will come face to face with the user's mental models of what they think something should look like or how it should work. And so you will be working through this conceptual and mental model process via your iterations of your prototypes. And hopefully this makes sense to you, but probably for most of you, if you think about a process that you design, something as simple as doing a load of laundry, and if you were to write it out as a diagram on a piece of paper, and then you tried your best to write that conceptual model, and then you showed it to somebody who washes laundry, then they could obviously help you refine your conceptual model because of their own actual mental model of that same process, because they've actually done it. I hope that makes sense for you. Further on conceptual models, this is a high-level plan for how the product, or in this case also your learning design, will work and fit together. The important elements of a conceptual model are some things that we have already been talking about in this class, which are the information architecture, how different things are structured, and then the terminology, which we are going to be exploring more this week, and the content strategy, which is kind of your conceptual model that you'll be coming up with through your prototype. And then, as I mentioned before, a mental model refers to a user's underlying expectations about how something should work. And it's formed based on what they already do, their prior experiences with similar products, or their assumptions. And so here is a good example in here, which is how to book a flight. We have a basic expectation because of our experiences of what steps we'll take to book a flight. And so if we were to use a tool, whether it's our phone or the internet, or go through, let's say, a booking agent, if you still use such a thing, you would have an expectation or a mental model of how that process should work. But somewhere in the past, someone has designed that model conceptually, and then over time people develop their mental models based on their experiences. And why this is important is because for our work this week, you will be creating a visual conceptual model of your prototype. So you've been writing on paper kind of the things you've been thinking about, but this week you're going to be taking that and really making it more granular so that you can put the concept on paper in more of a visual way. And so we will be talking about tasks, objects, and terminology definitions. So you'll be identifying in your conceptual model the tasks that the user should undertake, and then the objects, what are the physical objects that a user relates to. So, and it gives you some examples here like a calendar. So if you were using, let's say, a learning management system, a calendar would be an object that the kind of physical object that a user would relate to and utilize. And then lastly, terminology definitions. Make sure that as we're doing our design work and our prototype, that we have standard terminology across a product or our learning experience so that we don't call something in a system one thing at one point and then change the terminology, which would confuse an end user and make them not like the design. All of these items that we're mentioning go together so that you can create your visual conceptual model this week. Now, here's some further model principles for you to consider. So here's an example of how a furnace would be started up, and you can look at this diagram. But it does provide teams with the understanding of what tasks the users will be able to conduct, the objects that they will work within the app, the relationships those objects have to each other, the actions a user can take, the attributes associated with each project, and the language or terminology. So these are the overall principles you want to keep in mind as you go through the development of your conceptual model for your prototype. Now, one other thing you'll be asked to do this week is work with something called affordances and include those in your prototype. And so an affordance is what a user can do with an object based on the user's capabilities. So one of the quickest ways to understand what an affordance is in terms of a product or design is to think about a car. So a car has this very complex design, but an affordance might be something like the door handle that allows you to get into the car. So something that is an indicator of how you might use the product, or it might be an enticement to use a product. So in, let's say, a learning design system, you might actually have buttons that allow users to access or engage with the learning management system. So affordances are all over, and some of them are very obvious and some of them aren't so very obvious, but that is what an affordance is. So it, as it notes here, it is in essence an action possibility in the relation between user and an object. So this is, again, trying to give you a hint about where we're going to continue to go with our prototypes. And just a reminder, so your prototype is just an iterative process to first put on paper. What we did last week was the low fidelity design that you did, which were your early concepts. This week we'll take it a little further by putting the words that you already have in place to more of a visual conceptual model. And then you're going to be working with your peers to enhance your prototype with their feedback and mini tests that you'll do in one of our activities. So here's your individual assignment. As I've been mentioning, you will develop the first conceptual model iteration of your prototype by including these things called tasks, objects, and terminology definitions. And then step 2, you will incorporate affordances into your design. And again, these are ways to access your conceptual design as you think about the objects and tasks. And you will be, again, creating this on paper. There are some examples in Canvas for you to see. So don't worry if you don't totally understand it just yet. Go look at those examples and look at the resources you've been provided this week, and that should help you. Then your second assignment, your small group assignment, is you will share that individual prototype conceptual model that you've developed with your group, and then your peers will review the tasks, objects, and terminology definitions and give you feedback. In turn, you will choose one student and give them feedback this week. And this effort is essentially to share out your prototype as a mini test and give feedback so you will continue to refine your prototype. So in summary, I keep referring to this big diagram that's our design thinking process. We started the course working on empathy, our point of view, Mad Lib statements, our how might we questions. This was all in the empathy and define stages. We spent some time continuing to empathize and define, and then ideating on our before we did our prototype and doing some user research. And then now we're moving into this back and forth between prototype and testing. And so you'll be doing your conceptual model, which again is referring to your prototype, getting feedback from your peers, and we'll be going back and forth in this process. And then in addition to that, you are going to be reviewing emotional design, conceptual and mental models, and the resources I've provided. And as I noted before, you're going to create a conceptual model, share with your peers, do a mini test to give each other feedback, continue to refine, and then do a reflection on emotional design. I hope you enjoy this week, and thank you for your good work.